Greetings to all of you. A warm welcome to all of you. I'm going to give you sitting at the feet of Jesus or Rabbi Jesus. How the Jewishness of Jesus can transform your faith. And for today it is Rabbi Teach us to pray. This is your Pastor Yari. Prayer is an invitation to God to intervene in our lives, to let His will prevail in our affairs. It is the opening of a window to Him in our will, an effort to make Him the Lord of your soul. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Herschel. Remember Anne's El Al flight from New York. As soon as she arrived in Tel Aviv, she headed by taxi into Jerusalem, one of the world's most religious cities. Everywhere she went, she saw men strutting by in black fedoras, dark suits, and plain white skirts or shirts. Other men wore long beards with side curls hanging from beneath barrel-shaped fur hats. And there were women dressed in long-sleeved blouses and floor-length skirts. The other word was shirts, and now we are on the skirts. Excuse me. If possible, the city seemed even more religious than she had remembered it, though none of the people saw that they were making a fashion statement. All were saying something loud and clear about their religious beliefs and the community to which they belonged. I couldn't help but be impressed by their outward show of devotion, and remarks, especially during the hottest part of the summer. I even wondered what would happen if Jesus came striding onto the scene. Would he blend into this crowd better than I did with my wrinkle-free traveling pants, short-sleeved blouse, camera bag slung casually over my shoulder, and small gold cross on a chain around my neck? I wondered, too, whether the customs and habits of today's observant Jews would bear any resemblance to those held by Jesus and his contemporaries. I knew it would be foolish to project later religious tradition on Jesus by assuming that Judaism of today is identical to that practiced by ancient Jews. But might there be some similarities? Did Jesus and his disciples wear tefillin, yarmulks, or prayer shawls? Did they recite any of the prayers uttered by Jews today? Should I imagine Jesus as his disciples davening, swaying rhythmically back and forth as they prayed? Like the young girl who sat next to me on the plane from New York. As I was to discover, both history and the gospel accounts reveal a surprising relationship between certain of the distinctive customs of Orthodox Jews today and those shared by the Jewish people of Jesus' time. For instance, the custom of binding tefillin, small black boxes on the head and arm, was already hundreds of years old when Jesus was born. In one of the caves of the Qumran, near the Dead Sea, archaeologists in 1969 found intact tefillin from the 1st century area that still had parchment scrolls inside. The boxes were quite small, less than the size of a postage stamp. What is tefillin? Tefillin, or phylacteries, are leather boxes containing scripture that are worn on the forehead and left arm to fulfill the command in Deuteronomy 6 verse 8. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. In Jesus' time, tefillin were worn all day long. Today, they are worn only during prayer. Davening. Davening is a Yiddish word that means praying. It is often used to describe the practice of swaying like reciting prayers. This custom arose among Jews in the Middle Ages. Jesus probably wore tefillin most of the time, not just during prayer, as it is the custom today. Ancient manuscripts described how Jewish men wore them during the daylight hours, removing them only when eating, working, or entering an unclean place. If this was his practice, then Jesus was probably wearing small tefillin when he criticized those who were wearing large tefillin in order to advertise their super piety. Jesus, however, would not have worn a jarmuk or kippah, a man's head covering, that became customary several centuries later, beginning among the Jews in Babylon. In 1 Corinthians 11, Paul tells us that men's heads were uncovered, whereas women's heads were covered. Though Jesus would have worn the ceremonial tassels, tzitzitiot, plural of tzitzit, he would not have worn a prayer shawl, which developed only later. The point of the prayer shawl is to carry the tassels, and it is worn only for prayer and religious occasions. In Jesus' case, the tassels would have been attached to the other woolen garment he wore every day. We see them in Matthew 9 verse 20 when a woman grasped the tassels on his robe and was healed. Jesus' practice of wearing tzitzit all the time, rather than just at prayer, continues among Orthodox and Hasidic Jews of today. And during the time of Jesus, women were not required to wear tassels, but some wore them on their other clothes. Anyway, because some husbands borrowed their wives' cloaks occasionally. Also, the long side curls, piyot, that some Jewish men wear in order to observe Leviticus 19 verse 27, do not cut the hair at the sides of your head, are a fairly recent tradition observed by some groups in the past few hundred years, mostly from Poland and Russia. Interestingly, one tradition links the side curls to a command in Leviticus 19 verse 9 to 10. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edge of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time, or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. Some think that by leaving the corners of their heads uncut, these Jewish men are reminding themselves and others of the importance of leaving the corners of their fields uncut. In other words, of providing for the poor. Similarly, the wool coats and fur hats of Hasidic Jews arose out of 17th century Polish fashion, and davening became in Europe in the Middle Ages. Not everything Jewish is a picture of Jesus, yet some of the customs that seemed the strangest, like wearing tefillin and tassels, were very much a part of Jesus' everyday experiences. Come to think of it, Jesus may also have been more at home on my El Al flight from New York than I was. He would have been most familiar with the prayers the passengers were reciting, especially since they were in Hebrew, the language of prayer since Jesus' day. He could certainly have joined in as they said the Shema, pronounced Shema. 3 scriptures passages spoken as a declaration of utter devotion. Jesus would have recited this each morning and evening. And Jews have done for thousands of years. The name Shema comes from the first word of the first line. Hear, Shema, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is alone. The Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all of your might. When a teacher of the law asked Jesus which was the greatest commandment, Jesus responded by quoting from the Shema, Mark 12, verses 28 to 30. This prayer expressed the essence of his own deep commitment to the Father. And for many Jews, the words of the Shema are the very last words on their lips before they die, confirming their devotion to God. What other prayers might the passengers on my flight to Israel have been praying? Most likely they were reciting a series of benedictions, though to that back to the time of Nehemiah, hundreds of years before Jesus was born. The Amidah, also known as the 18 benedictions, there are 19 now, forms the heart of Jesus of Jewish worship. Sometimes people refer to it simply as tefillah, meaning prayer, because it's so central to worship. Twice a day from his boyhood, Jesus would have heard his father Joseph praying this traditional prayer, though not in the exact same words as it is prayed today. The Amidah wasn't organized into a formal liturgy until about 50 years after Jesus' time, by the grandson of Paul's rabbi, Gamaliel. Since then, for almost 2,000 years, it has remained largely unchanted, along with prayers of praise and thanksgiving. The Amidah includes petitions for God to send to the Messiah and to grant wisdom, forgiveness, healing, and deliverance. Like all Jewish prayers, it is filled with references to the scriptures, especially to Psalms. The Blessed Amidah liturgy begins with the words, Blessed are you, O Lord our God and God of our fathers, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob, commented on how repetitious this opening prayer is. The prayer book writers understood that each of these founding fathers of Judaism had to create a separate, individual, personal relationship with God, each in his own time. Isaac's world was not the world of his father. Jacob's world was not the world of his father or his grandfather. Each man had to discover God for himself, for each man has his own needs and expectations of God. Jesus too placed a priority on prayer. Evidence sprinkled throughout the Gospel shows that he observes the rich customs of Jewish prayer. He often arose early or went off alone to pray. He thought about prayer, wove parables about prayer, and even gave his disciples grip notes with words that they could pray to the Father. What can we learn from Jewish prayer customs that can help us to pray more like he did? Realizing how Jesus would have practiced the custom of his own religious culture can yield many insights into his teaching on prayer. Think for a moment about the Lord's Prayer. as beloved as it is, many of us scratch our heads over phrases like, "Hallowed be your name," or "Your kingdom come." These lines are at the same time familiar but strange. We struggle to understand them not because of any thick-headedness on our part, but because Jesus' words are so Jewish. His teaching on prayer relies on classic themes that still resonate with Jews today. It has been suggested that the Lord's Prayer is a summary as the word is summary of the Amidah because it encompasses several of its themes. Furthermore, the early church prayed the Lord's Prayer 3 times each day, just as the Amidah was prayed. Whether or not Jesus had the Amidah in mind when he thought the Lord's Prayer, the fact that it shares a similar themes shows that Jesus' prayers exemplified the wisdom of Jewish prayer. Even the first words of the Lord's Prayer, "Our Father," can teach us a lot. The Lord's Prayer reflects Jewish tradition by using the phrase "Our Father" rather than "My Father," unlike our tendency to focus on our own individual needs. Jewish prayers tend to involve community prayer for the needs of the whole people, and even today, some prayers cannot be offered unless a minyan, 10 adult male Jews, are present to represent the people as a whole. What is Amidah? The Amidah is the center prayer of the Jewish liturgy, prayed 3 times a day since the 1st century AD. It is also called Shmoneh Ezreh, meaning 18, because originally it was composed of 18 benedictions, and 19 petition was added about 100 years after Jesus lived. Notice, however, that while Jesus taught his disciples to address God as our Father, he himself spoke to God as "my Father," in the singular. In Jewish prayer, God was sometimes called our Father, but "my Father" was daring almost unheard of. Many would have marked this as evidence that he was the Messiah, because several prophecies describe the Messiah as someone who would be in an especially close relationship with God. Every time Jesus referred to God as "my Father," his listeners would have heard it as a bold claim. Remarkably, Jesus spoke of God as "my Father" when he was only 12 years old. Remember his response to his parents when they discovered him conversing with scholars at the temple. "Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" It seems that the boy Jesus was well aware of his identity and mission. What about the phrase, "Give us today our daily bread"? Why does Jesus tells us to pray for bread? Why not tell us to pray for roast beef or bananas? In Hebrew, the word for bread is lechem, can also mean food in general. When Jesus held up bread, broke it, and thanked his Father in heaven, he was giving thanks for the entire meal. And just as a Jewish father would have done, lechem represents not only all the food but God's sustenance as a whole. When we pray this way, we are asking God to provide for all our needs, grasping that can broaden our understanding of what Jesus was saying when he said, "I am the bread of life." Jesus himself is the deepest sustenance of all. Even today, bread has special significance in Jewish thinking. Some people believe that bread should never be discarded because doing so shows ingratitude for God's gracious provisions. Minyan. A minyan is a gathering of at least 10 adult male Jewish required for certain public prayers. In the first century, women could also be included in this number. Perhaps this ancient rabbinic prayer can help us better understand our own rabbi's teaching. It parallels Jesus' words, "Lead us not into temptation," which is a Jewish way of saying, "Don't let us succumb to our own evil inclinations. Help us avoid temptations and sin." We certainly won't go wrong if we hear Jesus' words as a plea for God to protect us from the evil that is both within and without. How not to pray. We will return to the Lord's Prayer in another chapter. When we now look more closely at the phrase, "Your kingdom come," but let's take a moment now to consider another aspect of Jewish prayer, how not to pray. You may wonder whether Jews only prayed fixed prayers at fixed times, though they had many set prayers. The Jewish people also prayed spontaneously. One first-century rabbi even warned against making one's prayers fixed, meaning praying empty, rote repetitions. He seemed to be making the same point Jesus did when he spoke about praying in vain repetitions, by babbling on and on. Other rabbis offered wisdom on how we should pray in our spontaneous, reflective moments. And interestingly, they, like Jesus, discussed what it meant to pray in vain. One said, if one's wife was pregnant and he said, "May it be thy will that she give birth to a male," lo, this is a vain prayer. If he was coming along the road and heard the noise of crying in the city and said, "May it be thy will that those who are crying are not members of my household," lo, this is a vain prayer. Why are these vain or empty prayers? Because there is no point in asking God to change the sex of an unborn baby, something God has already determined at the time of conception. To pray that God would change the gender of a child would be to pray that God would alter history, changing reality to suit us. The second idea is that if we should hear cries of distress, we should refrain from praying that they are not coming from members of our own family. And once again, we would be asking God to change history. At the feet of the rabbi. Try this week find a way to increase your kavanah, your attentiveness to God's presence when you are at work, whether digging a ditch, baking a souffle, writing a sermon, or chairing a meeting. Pray for the grace to realize that no matter where you are in the presence of the Lord. To remind yourself, consider printing the word kavanah on an index card or whatever it's best for you. Place it where it will catch your attention throughout the day. Pray the following blessing from the Amidah over the next few days. If one of them particularly strikes you, try memorize it. Lead us back, our Father, to your Torah. Bring us near, our King, to your service. and cause us to return in perfect repentance before you. Blessed are you, O Lord, who accept repentance. Heal us and we shall be healed. Help us and we shall be helped, for you are our joy. Grant full healing for all our wounds, for you, O God and King, are a true and merciful physician. Blessed are you, O Lord, who heals the sick of his people Israel. Bless for us, O Lord our God, this year and all of its yield for good, and shower down a blessing upon the face of the earth. Fill us with your bounty and bless our year, that it be as the good years. Blessed are you, O Lord, who blesses the years. We acknowledge to you, O Lord, that you are our God as you were the God of our fathers, forever and ever, rock of our life, shield of our salvation. You are unchanging from age to age. We thank you and declare your praises for our lives that are in your hands and for our souls that are entrusted to you. Your miracles are with us every day, and your benefits are with us at all times, evening and mornings and midday. You are good, for your mercies are endless. You are merciful, for your kindness are never complete. From everlasting we have hoped in you, and for all of these things may be named be blessed, your name be blessed and exalted always and forevermore. Let every and maybe you can write them down for yourself. May God bless your heart, my dear ones. This is your Pastor Yeti. Bye.